Our unusual story begins with a white-haired man telling another guy about the importance of the quality of honesty. He then gave an honest answer about not being up to the task, so he was ready to give up his life. But his friends couldn't accept that outcome, so they were willing to pay out of their own pockets so that he could at least have a shot. This task was to make a drink better than a certain fire potion, and in doing it, the lad philosophized on various subjects. After a short time, he served the drink to the man so that he could appreciate it. As he tasted it, he felt blissful, and in his mind, he reflected that this glass was very invigorating, and this fiery potion had the touching name of Bloody Mary. The man felt that this wine made him feel a long-lost happiness, like a body torn apart by sadness. Thanks to the drink, even emotions hidden deep in his heart are bursting out like never before. But he was able to restrain his emotions and calmly expressed his admiration, asserting that he had never drunk such a splendid cocktail and wanted to know how the fellow made hers. However, at that moment, they noticed that the one who had prepared this cocktail had suddenly disappeared, which was a surprise to them. So he ordered everyone to go looking for him, because he's a real talent. Our main character's name was Joe, and he didn't belong to this world. His real name was Tao, and in the past, he worked as a bartender and was known as the God of Wine. But because of his love for this drink, he tasted a found wine from the Han Dynasty, and then he vomited blood, and Jejo went into a coma for a while. When he woke up, he realized he was in another world, and his soul had moved into the body of some orphan on the street. The only thing he had on him was a jade coupon, but in the time he has been here, Jejo has learned that this world is called the Continent of the Five Elements, and this city is called Laihuo. It is located in the western part of the Manhwa Empire, although the way of life of the people here is not very different from the world in which he lived before, and as Jejo has learned, there's no way he can go back to his world, which is why he has to live in this world, adapting to it. At that moment, flames broke out beside him, and fiery feathers were sprinkled. It was the same man from the bar, and now he resembled a phoenix. The fact that he was flying really surprised Joe. The man said directly that he was here to pick up J.O., which surprised him no end. There was a sudden flash, and J.O., lying on the floor, thought he was dead again, but after looking around a bit, he realized he was still alive, and the man sitting next to him was glad that J.O. was awake. The man told him that he had slept for 3 whole days, after which he asked J.O. if he remembered what had happened in the bar. They were in a bar that was blazing with passion and was the most popular bar in Laihuo. When J.O. realized this, the man ordered him to prepare a glass of his best cocktail, and he began to remember the man who called the white-haired man Janum Lao. After a while, the man prepared a cocktail and gave it to Lao, claiming it was the best cocktail ever, called Fiery Passion. He also asserted that this cocktail is the best of all in the entire Manhwa Empire, and that Lao cannot find a cocktail finer than this one. And that's when J.O. overheard their dialogue and decided to see if this was the best cocktail ever. These words whetted his competitive spirit, so he proposed a wager. If he could make a blazing passion better than this, the man would have to pay for all the drinks that J.O. would order. Remembering all of this, Joe realized that it was Lao who was in the store where he decided to make this wager, but he still didn't understand why Lao had kidnapped him. But he dared to assume it was because of that cocktail. But he didn't consider it a kidnapping, but claimed to be J.O.'s savior, then talked about how he couldn't think of J.O. being so weak that he fainted right there, so he had no choice but to bring it home. But it still sounded very strange to Joe. But the man paid no attention to his lodgings and asserted that J.O.'s body was still weak, so he was letting him stay with him for a while longer. He also called J.O.'s Bremen skills astounding, because even though he's so young, the cocktails come out beautifully. So he wanted to know the answer to the question of Joe's relationship with a certain wine god named Duskon. But when he heard that name, He just had a look of surprise and confusion on his face, because he's never heard of Duskon. He only knows the god of blame, Li Jai Tao, and that's what he is. But Jao realized that if only a reborn person in this body told him that, it would sound like nonsense. So he decided he'd just give whatever reason he could and be done with it. So he started telling a made-up story about being born into a family of winemakers. But when both his parents died, their firm closed down. Joe went on to say that he went to a bar that night because of his love of wine. But he didn't think he would meet Lao. He just heard that that bar made the best wine, so he wanted to see it for himself. But after that, he decided to ask a question too. He was curious about where he was and who Lao was, and why he had these superpowers. But the man was greatly surprised at such a question and simply laughed. He showed the fire he had let out of his fingers and asserted that J.O. looked like a small child who had gotten tangled up in a grapevine. But after that, Lao decided to answer that J.O. is in the most famous academy in Lihuo, and Lao is the dean of the academy. And this is not some superpower, but the yin-yang crown of the 5 elemental crowns. He is a grand master of the 7th level of the crown of fire. He began to explain that being a yin-yang master on a continent where the 5 elements are the mainstay is very prestigious. An ordinary yin-yang master capable of controlling the crown is on par with 10 great fighters. Those who have gone further in mastering the crown can easily subdue cities, and the strongest of the yin-yang masters can defy the heavens. It all got Jao thinking about the fact that some people have the opportunity to change their lives and realize the highest point of their potential. Lao affirmed that his words were true and asked Jao not to think that the yin-yang crown master was so easy to become, because the selection to become a yin-yang master is extremely strict, that ordinary people cannot even dream of it. But if Jao becomes his personal bartender, Lao will let him stay on as a part-time student. He realized that if it weren't for this weak body and age limitations, he would have reached greater heights, and as a god of guilt, it depressed him that he had fallen so low. But he figured if God gave him another chance to get back to the top, why not take it? So he agreed to Lao's terms. But Jao was only willing to do it on 3 conditions. 1, he needs a private bar room. 2, he tells Lao only 1 cocktail a day, but doesn't guarantee that cocktail will be memorable, and with Lao covering all costs. 3rd, Lao should help him finish his training as soon as possible and teach him how to control the yin-yang crown. And if Jao realizes that he cannot concentrate the crown during this period, he can leave at any time. He agreed, but he also had a condition that he would help Jao learn to concentrate the yin-yang crown, but he would not teach him magic skills, because magic could only be used with the crown. And to learn magical abilities, you need a master, or you can buy expensive magic books. But even after spending a lot of money, it is not a fact that he will learn strong spells, because at Lao, according to him, it is impossible to learn magic without a high talent. Also, he can have only 1 student, and this is one of the conditions, but it suited Jao, so without much thought, he agreed to Lao's terms. Also, Lao had already prepared a meal for Zhou, and after it, he was going to give him a yin-yang test for his attribute. At this point, he noticed that Zhao's clothes were burnt, so he decided to give him a school uniform to start with. But he was more interested in starting it all, so Lao immediately conjured up a circle. 2 matter in the form of fire and ice were before him, and Zhao took the staff of fire. Lao ordered him to put his right hand on the red side and his left hand on the blue side. Then, Lao used his yin-yang power to stimulate his body. Because of this, he felt something flowing inside his body, and the sensation was very pleasant. Lao was surprised, so Jao asked why he was so surprised, and even thought for a second that he wanted to say that Jao was brilliant, but it wasn't quite like that. because his genius is just pure failure. Joe has the most accurate yin-yang balance he's seen in his 60 years of life. He began to worry about what was wrong with his balance of power, and as Lao explained, for ordinary people it may be normal, because they don't need it to live, but for wizards, yin-yang is a pain in the ass. The ratio of yin and yang can be estimated as 5 to 5, 3 to 7, 2 to 8, 1 to 9, and the greater the difference, the easier it is for the magician to raise the level. And the magician with a ratio of 1 to 9, which has more revealed one of the sides and is called a genius, and with its yin-yang balance, will be extremely slow to raise the level of. Lao clarified that if Jo really wanted to be able to concentrate the crown, he would need to undergo a lot of hellish training without losing control, and those who have not mastered the technique before their majority may not even try again. However, he asked him not to get upset early, because with his cocktail mixing skills, he would make a great bartender. But Jo was pleased and thanked him for his help, affirming that he would still try to become a yin-yang wizard, even with these powers. Not only are his bartending skills as good as the professionals, but he has the willpower to create a treasure trove out of garbage. Lao asserted that Jo could count on his help, but had to treat him to his cocktails in return. But he decided that since he had no talent, he'd work 1,000 times harder than the others. Jo believed that one day he would soar like an eagle into the sky, for his life was in his hands alone, at which point he remembered that today's opening ceremony was earlier than usual. All of a sudden, some guy called out to Jo because he noticed he was a rookie. The guy came closer and told me that he was a first year and had the fire element, and then he wanted to know more about JWO. Jo was a little confused because for a second he thought this guy was female-oriented, so he asked about it, but it made him angry. So he decided to defend his honor and claimed to be a guy and hoped he didn't have to strip to prove it to Jo. He also decided to make it clear that firebenders are not just men. At that moment, a man who was looking for this guy named Bisu came up to them and did so because he wanted to overpower him. This guy hid behind Jo's back and asked him to help him get away without making too much noise. Su claimed he wasn't afraid of the man named Carl, as he had just defeated him and made him eat the ground during the entrance exams. He stood behind Jo and introduced him as his boss, asserting that in defeating him, Carl would be able to talk to him. But he wasn't really interested, so he figured he'd just beat 2 people at once. Jo realized that if Carl hit him, it was unlikely to knock him out, but it would hurt a lot. But there was no time to think about it anymore. But even if Carl's bigger than him, Jo's leg is longer than his arm. He successfully struck a blow at the fellow, but the latter in turn only grinned. Su was able to catch a Jo after a kick return, but even that one hurt him quite a bit. But Carl recognized Jo's skill because he expected so much less from him. But JJO himself realized that his strike had done nothing to him, but if he and Su teamed up, they could take him by surprise. After a bit of thought, he realized that they would have to face each other, and even the Su realized that they needed to attack together, so he suggested this option. The battle began, and while Jo distracted Carl in hand-to-hand combat, Su stealthily crept up from behind and then did a less than honorable job of kicking Carl between the legs. So he approved that it was cheating, but they weren't going to listen to him, and the Jo approved that it wasn't over yet. Su talked about how this strike was for Carl bullying the weak, at which point someone ordered them to stop. Some intimidating man grabbed their heads and seemed ready to kill them right now. Jo didn't know the man, but they felt his pressure when he said they got into a fight on the first day of school. After that, he formed a line in a word, as if he knew how to direct the actions of the people. He claimed that he saw their bravery, fighting on the athletic field and breaking school rules. So he decided that the 3 of them would not go to the opening ceremony, but instead run 20 laps in the arena. And when the Su tried to object by saying that they weren't the ones who started the fight, The man gave a judgmental look and asserted that whoever came in last gets 5 more penalty laps, and if they didn't make it, terrible things would happen. Only after he sent them running did the man decide to introduce himself, and it turned out he was the class teacher for them, which was pretty bad news. After a while, they all ran another lap on the academy's athletic field. Students who were nearby noticed JWO and the others, and were surprised that they were able to piss off the classroom teacher and get punished. The teacher, in turn, noticing this, invited them to join them, after which he had already ordered them to run to the academic building for the opening ceremony, and gave them a timer in the form of 10 seconds. And whoever didn't make it in time to join Joe, everyone was very scared, so they ran with all their legs to the ceremony, and the teacher was upset, not believing that he was so scary. After watching for a while, the teacher realized that the 3 of them were not so bad, for on the first day they had fought, which reminded him of those times, and especially J.O. and his kicking, which was not strong, but the technique itself was interesting. Joe was at this time running another lap and was very much exhausted. At that moment, SU ran up to him because he noticed that J.O. was on edge, and he wondered how he could pass the endurance test at the entrance exams. He apologized for dragging J.O. into this adventure and now having to work so hard for him, and J.O. forgave SU because he didn't run away when the fight started. But when he heard that, he resented it because he doesn't consider himself a person who looks like someone who runs away all the time. After that, he asked J.O. to let him help out in a little friendly way, but he refused, claiming he was still able to escape on his own. Joe asked SU to run at his own pace and talked about not having to adjust to him, but even so, SU wanted to run with him. The teacher noticed their conversation, so he ordered them to hurry up and threatened to increase the punishment. And when the teacher heard this, the SU realized that things were bad, so he sped up and told J.O. what was ahead of him. After a while, they had already run 15 laps, and J.O. was running out of energy, but he realized that he couldn't give up, because to become a yin-yang master, he needed to put in more effort than the others. The teacher continued to observe, and all the time he noticed only great strength and perseverance in these men. Carl and SU had already completed their 20 laps, and J.O. was still running hard. He decided that he had to run 5 more penalty laps. When he heard this, the SU tried to stop him by saying that he had exceeded his limit, and Carl wanted to apologize to him. They just couldn't watch J.O. run without stopping anymore, so they started running too, much to his surprise. The SU claimed that it was their fault for what happened, so they can't leave their brother alone to work out his punishment. And Carl said that he wasn't running to support him, but just to prove that he could run as much as he did. And in the end, they all ran together like friends who would never betray each other and support each other in times of need. The teacher noticed what they had finished and asked them to come up to him, then asserted that he had taught them a lesson today and hoped they had learned it. He explained that dueling was fine, but they should warn him about it, and he would find them a place where they could fight at their pleasure. They all said in unison that they would not fight again, especially not without the teacher's knowledge. But the teacher was surprised, because he thought that they were enjoying the fight, and although he disliked naughty students, he could not stand lazy ones. So he decided that if they wanted to win in the future, they would train even harder. Only after that did he decide to introduce himself as Sia Tian, the head of the Firebin faculty. He didn't like idle chatter, so he asked them to speak only on business. At the same time, in his thoughts, he was a kind man who thought of them as full of vigor and hoped they would be outstanding students. While the teacher pondered, SU began to suggest to Carl that they end their rivalry, but Carl didn't believe him and thought that SU was always cheating. Then he remembered that during the entrance exam, Carl was ahead of SU, but he kicked him, and thus was able to take the first place in the sports section. SU couldn't even think that Carl still had a grudge because of that, and claimed that he could only blame himself for being careless, and also believed that Carl wouldn't overpower SU in tandem with Joe. It made him angry, and Jo asked him not to get involved, because he doesn't even know much about SU, so he doesn't have to help again. SU in turn could not believe this turn of events, that Jo would abandon him in such a situation. After that, JJO came up to Carl and started saying that Carl started the fight first, so the responsibility is all on him, and he decided to add that Carl can hit SU because he hit him, and when they get even, Carl and JJO can be friends. Because of this, SU was very upset and couldn't understand why he was so unlucky today, because at first he wanted to use Jo, but he didn't think he would become a punching bag. Jo and Carl at this time had smiles on their faces, and Jo started to argue that you have to be accountable for all your actions, and he also asked SU if he wanted an enemy like Carl. Before striking, SU, who looks a lot like a girl, called Carl Big Brother and asked him to be gentle, which made Carl embarrassed. He couldn't hit for psychological reasons, so he decided to say he was too lazy to bother with such a trivial matter. SU thought they could be friends now, but Carl argued that no one would be friends with such a softie. He claimed he'd never seen a guy look even more like a girl, and SU claimed it was because the yin-yang attribute takes up 80% of his body. Upon hearing this, Jo realized he had a 2-to-8 ratio, but since he just couldn't believe it, he decided to ask directly. The man claimed it was like that, but to be more specific, his element of Dean takes 8.5, so he's a self-proclaimed genius among all the Dean newbies, the most talented. But Carl didn't see it as a big deal, because he also has 8.5 of Dean's fire element, but he doesn't brag about it. Jo realized that Carl was up to something, but as he explained, he just didn't like the way SU was acting, and right after that, he abruptly remembered that he had forgotten to ask Joe's name and what department he was from. He introduced himself and decided not to hide anything, so he said directly that he was a member of both Bin and Din. From those words, they realized that his yin-yang was in perfect balance, but they also realized that it was almost impossible to concentrate the yin-yang crown with such a balance. Jo was upset, but said that if SU and Carl were geniuses, then Jo was a genius in his own way, but SU still couldn't understand how he got into the academy with that balance, and he decided not to hide. So he said that he went through the so-called back door as a servant, and also he did not think that a person with yin-yang balance cannot become a yin-yang mage, because in his opinion, it was only necessary to train 32 times harder. After hearing this, the SU thought he was crazy, but decided to support Jo, because, as the SU's mom used to say, if you put in all the effort, even if you lose, you won't regret it. And then he said that if Jo needed help, he could turn to him. Carl also asserted that Jo could count on his help, since they were now named brothers to each other. After all that, Jo decided to ask what they were going to do now, and Carl suggested we go to his house, since no one was there. But SU argued that it was better to go to him, because in their department, most of the students are girls, and many of them are beautiful. However, Carl felt that SU should forget about it, because if they went to his wing, even Carl would be corrupted by SU's yin aura, and the fact that when Carl said that, he called SU a sissy really pissed SU off, at which point Jo stopped them and asked them to stop fighting, and suggested they go to his place, stating that he was very comfortable and could make their drinks for them. Because of these words, they were rather surprised, for alcohol was forbidden in the academy, and before entering the academy, they were all tested, and even if they had drunk before, they were deprived of it when they entered it. But the fact that Jo had booze solved everything for them, and they were willing to serve him for it. Sue asserted that there was nothing better in Li Hao than the wine of Jo, whom he now called boss. But Jo himself asked to keep his voice down, because if the teachers heard, it would be bad for them. At which point, a girl suddenly popped out of nowhere who had heard them talking about a certain better wine. But this teacher said that making a rule that forbade drinking in the academy was stupid, and picked up on how long it had been since she'd had a good drink. At the same moment, another teacher, their class teacher, appeared nearby and asked the girl to watch her behavior, because he was also a teacher. But she only laughed and suggested that he was jealous of her with his new students. He introduced himself as Xia Chang, teacher of the fire bin department, and introduced the girl as Kyo Tian, teacher of the fire ding department. The CYO was quite friendly, so she asked to be taken care of, which really freaked out the JO and SU. Xia decided not to drag it out, so he switched the topic to the fact that he would call the students from the bin department, and whoever he called should stand up and answer loudly. After that, department's fire department began, and our main character, G.I. Joe, was the first to be called in, and all the students noticed the fact that J.O. was named twice, and all the students began to suspect what was wrong, but thought it was some kind of mistake. Xia asked everyone to calm down, and began to explain that the J.O. is a special case, because its yin-yang balance is different from everyone else, and it is just a new department in the Academy's fiery Bin Lin department. Joe awkwardly confirmed it, and the others couldn't believe that he was a yin-yang wizard at all, and someone didn't understand if it was possible to concentrate a crown with an even balance. But one of the students told everyone not to worry, because it had nothing to do with them. Xia confirmed that today would be their first class at Li Hao Academy, and it would be on basic knowledge of their magic. The teacher began to explain that there are 5 sides of the world, and each of them corresponds to an element, and each element, in turn, corresponds to 2 attributes: yin-yang, in the east forest, Jia, Wiyui, in the south earth, Wayu, Ji, in the west metal, Zheng, Sin, and in the north water, Ren, Gyu. Each attribute in their country has its own place to live and prosper, and all together they form their continent of 5 elements. Regardless of the element of yin-yang master, there is a general level system. Each title corresponds to the position of yin-yang master, such as apprentice, scholar, master, great master, grandmaster, great grandmaster, celestial scholar, celestial master, celestial lord, and special title. And regardless of the attribute, the key in becoming a yin-yang wizard is to summon the yin-yang crown. After saying these words, XYA called out to the CYO teacher. These 2 teachers have images of their power that looked just like the phoenix bird and the ice serpent. They both had yin-yang crowns, and SU, as well as many students, were very surprised that they could see it. This was indeed a yin-yang crown. They are divided into 4 parts. Firstly, the ring we can see is called the ring of the crown. This is the base of the yin-yang crown. Each crown has 9 spikes. They call them crown peaks. When these points come together, they create the base crown. Stars show the basic level of yin-yang master. 4 stars mean 3 peaks. Everyone who develops the crown to 5 stars rises to a higher level in the classification. Joe began to realize that this was what Ian Lau had told him in the past. After the story, the teacher affirmed that this was the most basic knowledge they had to learn, and now they had time to discuss it among themselves, and in case anyone had any questions, the teacher allowed them to come up and clarify. When no one had any questions left, the teacher called J.O. with him for some important reason. Stepping back, Xia told him about realizing why Joe was so weak on the morning of his punishment, since he had gotten into the academy through the back door, and he couldn't understand what the director found in him that he took him under his wing in spite of his characteristics. But he decided not to be so biased against J.O., so he decided to give it a year. and if he didn't prove himself, he'd kick him out of the academy, and not even the principal would stop him. Despite such threats, Joe decided to ask about the stones, but Shia asserted that he didn't need to know about it, and the only thing he needed to know about it was that it would help him become a yin-yang mage. He was ordered to sit cross-legged, no questions asked. Then he had to close his eyes, put his hands on his knees, and relax, and he was forbidden to move in order not to feel it. Sia Chang took the crystal crowns in both hands, and as his eyes shone, Joe felt a searing heat from the magical power of the fire element. He could feel a scorching and chilly warmth throughout his body as 2 jets of air began to flow through his veins. His body seemed to be disintegrating, and at the same time filled with yin-yang heat at the same time. And no doubt the searing stream was coming out from the crown of Fire Bin, and the cool stream from Fire Din. After these 2 streams entered Jo's body, they dispersed throughout his body under the strong action of yin-yang energy. It all united and came out of his body along with drops of sweat. On Jo's forehead, 2 lights began to slowly connect, thanks to the energy in Jo's body from the crystal crowns, forming a special star. Sia affirmed that from this point on, he was a Bindin mage of the 1st level department, and now he must practice using this method, and must remember to use his mind to feel the magical power of his dual elements and absorb it in equal amounts. Joe thanked the SJA teacher for that, since he might not have been able to help him out, and he claimed that he was saying that those crowns were a gift from the principal, so he should be thanking the principal, not him. After this dialogue, he ordered Jo to go to his room, and also remarked that he would soon feel the change. He was talking to some important person in the principal's office, to whom he said he would accept and consider the guild's offer, and the man who was talking to him, hearing this, decided it was time for him to return to the guild, and the director decided to escort him out. However, he started to say that it wasn't necessary, and asked if the director should put the scroll away. But he asserted that the man shouldn't worry, since no one was supposed to come here anyway. At this time, Jo was walking to the principal's office, and in his mind he was thinking that this was the best cocktail he could make with his current body condition, and Yan Lao had obliged him to help him with the concentration of the yin-yang crown, and he still hadn't thanked him for it. But going inside, he found no one, so he decided to leave the drink on the table. But he could not help but be interested in the scroll that lay in the center of the table, even though he didn't know what it was. The scroll beckoned to Jo, making him unable to stop his desire. Eventually touched the scroll. A beam shone into the sky that created circles of different colors. The director noticed this and knew it was bad business. This beam started to create chaos, and everything around started to collapse. Magma was everywhere around, and lightning from the sky was rattling non-stop. Jo couldn't figure out what this place was, or where he was. The place was insanely hot, and it felt like it was about to swallow him whole. He was so sick, he thought he was about to die a second time, so he asked for help, screaming at the top of his voice. But at that moment, the girl next to her smelled a wonderful fragrance that she had never smelled before. He felt as if the blood was burning through his body, and he might soon be dried up by the lava, and he believed that this was how his life would end. But at that moment, the warm air that was making his body melt seemed to dissipate. Right in front of him, a huge red-golden beam began to strike the ground, which caught his attention. At the very top of this beam, a huge flower formed, above which appeared a red circle, around which flew a bunch of petals from the flower. Out of the flower came some woman who was walking, leaving flowers beneath her, just stepping. This woman was fully clothed in red, and her hair was almost to the floor. She was incredibly beautiful, and Jo just couldn't help but notice it, like a goddess who had just descended from the heavens. The girl began to gather some liquid into a pile due to some unique ability, then began to suck up that liquid. She liked it very much. It was the same drink that Jo made, but she called it a human baby and wanted to know what the drink was called. Joe, as the god of wine, was pleased at this assessment of the drink, and when he came to his senses, he spoke sharply about it being a type of alcoholic beverage. She was surprised that it was alcohol and began to tell me that she had drunk alcohol made by humans before. It was good too, but she had never tasted anything like what she was drinking now. Joe was surprised at the clarification about humans and asked the girl if she was human. The girl who was with her secret laughed and asserted that people could not do what she could do. When she showed it to him, Joe was very surprised and realized she had to be careful, but she reassured him that there was nothing to be afraid of, and it was just one of his powers, and she was sure he hadn't heard of this place because only a couple of people knew about it, and she also said that their worlds didn't overlap and everyone lived in their own universe. The girl said that he didn't answer her question, so she repeated it, and he explained that it was indeed alcohol, but that he had made it, and he wasn't surprised that she hadn't tasted it before, because he was the only one in the world who could make it. The drink is called the Light of the Full Moon. It's a drink that no other living thing can compare to, and it's a drink that people fall in love with and suffer from. J.O. said that if a girl could experience all those feelings and then feel the warmth inside, then his drink could find its connoisseur. The girl said it was just as J.O. described it, and she felt it all. The girl confirmed that the cocktail was really good, but she thought he described it much better. Joe asserted that he had answered her question, and now he wanted to know where they were and who she was. She laughed and started talking about how it had been a long time since she had last seen a human, and she was curious how someone as weak and small as J.O. could get here. After all, this is the center of the earth, and her name is Li Yan. Joe thought about it and said that Li Yan's name didn't really suit her, because Li Yan is reckless and ruthless, but it gives a different impression of her. But the girl affirmed that people themselves say not to judge a book by its cover, then said that he had not seen her reckless and ruthless side, which is why he cannot understand the meaning of his name, and every living thing in the dungeon calls her Empress Li Yan. But for the cocktail recipe, she lets him call her by her first name. Joe was confused and couldn't believe that this was the center of the earth. And how could there be critters in the dungeon? After that, he began to rise involuntarily on the flower, and the girl began to explain that no one would harm him without her permission, so there was nothing to be afraid of. She asked to look down, explaining that this was the highest place of all, and he could see everything from here, and she was sure he hadn't heard of this place. Very few people know about this place, and it is inhabited by beings that are very different from those that live on the surface. The dungeon consists of 18 levels. The one they are on is the 18th level, the very center of the earth, and the one in front of them is the central lake. The whole planet is divided into two parts, surface and underground, and people live on the surface. The power of the beings living here depends on the level of the underground. The closer they live to the surface, the lower their power. And the only one who lives here on level 18 is her. From all these explanations, he realized that this girl was the strongest in the dungeon. She said that she could not say that for sure, because the girl would like to visit the world of people, because she had not been there for a long time. But it is too much dangerous. And these words surprised J.O., because having such power, she is still afraid. But it was something she can't tell him about. Joe was sick of her calling him Buddy, so he asked her to stop doing that, and he introduced himself properly. She approved his request, affirming that she would call him Little G.I. Joe. He was confused by what she decided to call him, so he asked her to call him without the baby prefix. But she did not understand why he did not like her calling him that, for she really thought him small and sweet, and she began to suspect that he did not like his own name and suggested that he should call him little Gigi or little Joe. He got a little frustrated and realized he had no choice, so he resigned himself to the fact that she would call him Baby G.I. Joe. After he accepted it, she decided to find out how he got here. After all, he must realize it wasn't that easy, to which he honestly replied that he didn't know how it happened, because he had just opened some scroll with a drawing, and then he was surrounded by 5 colored rays, and he felt like he was falling, and that's how he ended up here. When she heard about the scroll with the drawing, she thought of a magical yin-yang scroll, or a teleportation scroll, but she realized that if this scroll sent someone 1,000 miles underground, then it must have tremendous power. But Joe didn't understand anything about yin-yang magic scrolls, and he wondered if he could get back to the surface. And after that question, she decided to offer him some kind of deal. When he heard that, he was a little confused and didn't know what to say until he knew what she meant. She told me that it's lonely here on level 18, but it's not easy to leave. But even after all these explanations, he could not understand what she wanted him to do to. The girl asserted that he should tell her about their human world, and she also wanted him to bring her that cocktail more often. And in return, she would help him get back to the surface. However, she did point out that if his cocktail didn't taste good, she'd get angry, and if that happened, he'd be swimming in a lake of magma. He didn't see it as a problem, and right after that she assumed he was a yin-yang wizard, and then, after a moment's hesitation, asked to be allowed to assess his abilities, for she supposed she could help him in some way. He smelled a wonderful scent, and realized that it was her scent, such an unusual scent that was light and warm, and the rest is gentle, clean air with the sweet smell of flowers after the dew. Thanks to her powers, she was able to watch its yin-yang, and was surprised to see that it was in perfect balance. It was the first time she had ever seen a person with a balanced double attribute of fire, and by this, they were becoming more and more interested in him. Joe was surprised by this, and decided to ask her if people who have complete balance are considered nothing, and noted that he had to work 32 times harder to become a true yin-yang master. It made her very angry, which made everything around her start to fall apart, and it scared Joe. But the girl quickly calmed down and apologized for scaring him. Then she explained that she didn't do it on purpose, because after his words that mages with full balance are insignificant, she was a bit mad, because she also has a perfect balance of fire yin-yang attribute. Joe was surprised to see that she too had the fire bing-ding attribute, and the girl began to reply philosophically that just as yang couldn't grow alone, yin couldn't survive. At this point, there was complete chaos all around, and Joe couldn't figure out what this monstrous force was. She observed that while one seeks to learn one attribute, he masters two, and the fact that the speed of development was slow as she thought didn't matter, especially since people used combining attacks, and if Jo became a yin-yang mage of 2 attributes, it meant that he would need the help of others to combine it. But Jo himself decided to talk about how all he needs to be able to do now is concentrate the crown. She decided to offer him to train here. She will give him 6 hours, and if he trains here, he doesn't need to be 32 times harder, because his pace of development will be on par with other people. He would only have to bring her cocktails, and that would be considered payment for her help. After saying that, she let him start right away, but he said that he couldn't stay today, because he had carelessly taken the headmaster's scroll, and he had to hurry to explain everything to him, and he thought everyone was already worried because of his absence. The girl accepted that answer and agreed to send him back, but asked him to remember that no one must know about her or what he had seen here. Lastly, she said that when he wanted to come back, he could just put his hand to his heart and say her name. She bid him farewell and affirmed that she would look forward to his marvelous cocktail. Jo did return and assumed it was a dream, and began to suspect that Li Yan was a figment of his imagination. But after thinking for a while, he realized that it was definitely not a dream. It was real, and this adventure with Li Yan was very unusual. At that time, the director was talking to someone in his office, and this person was asking him why he was turning a blind eye to the fact that Joe was coming and going as he pleased. But he didn't care about that, and it was more important to find out where Joe had teleported to. And that's when Jo walks into the office, much to their surprise. Teacher Sia was very angry and couldn't believe that Jo had dared to come. But the LAO director put his arm around him and asked him not to scare the child, and such kindness surprised Shia. He apologized and agreed that he shouldn't have touched his stuff, and he just thought it was a regular scroll with a drawing on it. The director asked not to worry about it, because the main thing was that he was alive, but he still decided to tell Jo that this world was full of things that were better left untouched. Jo felt guilty, so to make up for it, he made a new cocktail, which surprised Lao, but he didn't think to refuse it. The cocktail is called Beauty in Red, and the name was given in honor of Li Yan's image. This cocktail is as delicate as water and as regal explosive girl. At that moment, Alao remembered that he wanted to ask where Jo had teleported to, but he decided to lie, saying that his luck had not run out, as he had been teleported out of town. And after a day's journey, he was able to return. The next day in Lakao, a teacher lined up all the students in a row. Sia stood confidently and talked about how from today, the bin and din department students would be taught separately. The fire bin students would be taught by him, and the fire din students would follow the CYO teacher. SU decided to mess with Jo and approved that bin din students were out of luck today. After that, the teacher asked Jugil to leave bin department and BISU to leave din department, and explained that today girls and boys learned separately in class. So he ordered GL to go to din department and BISU to bin department, but for a while. However, one of the students objected, claiming to be a member of the bin department, so he wanted to join their class. But surprisingly, Teacher Shia wasn't even going to argue and allowed him to stay behind. After a short time, they ran the whole department, and SU was not happy about it, and Jo wanted to know more about the girl who objected to the teacher. And as he explained, she's a freshman in the bin department, and SU heard her yin-yang is 1 in 9, and because of her boyish appearance, everyone calls her tomboy. At which point someone grabbed SU's shoulder, and Jo realized what was going on almost immediately. Was the girl who started claiming she promised SU she'd burn his hair if he called her a tomboy. Something terrible was going on outside the city of Lihao. A freshman with a yin-yang 9-to-1 ratio got really pissed off at SU. He didn't like that very much, so he started shouting confidently that she couldn't raise her hand to him. But she felt that without teaching him a lesson, there was no way to avoid his profanity. Jo warned the SU about the attack, and the girl was surprised to see that Jo had a level 5 bin fire level. But right now, she was more interested in getting revenge for the hurtful words. So the girl continued to attack and order the SU to surrender. Many fireballs rained down on him, which he barely fought off. But Jo wasn't going to stand for it, so he ordered them to stop this very second, because he didn't think she was allowed to hurt any of his friends while he was here. But SU stopped him, saying that it was okay, because she was a level 5 apprentice, and they couldn't even beat her with the 3 of them. Jo knew this, but didn't understand how it could be left the way it was. After that, the SU said that Jo should stay out of it, and he would handle it himself, because he had a plan, which was to improve his yin-yang skills and take revenge, and then defeat her by his own strength. The girl heard what he said and agreed to just wait, and I don't think she took off at a brisk pace. And then they tried to see if they were okay for a while, and just kept running. After the run, everyone was back in formation. And in the process, Carl noticed that John had gotten stronger, which he thought was due to his daily workouts. The teacher noticed their conversation, so he immediately affirmed that it was impossible to relax. So he ordered them to sit down and develop their yin-yang, and it's only when they're tired that they can feel their energy flow better. He began to explain that, for them, the bin department wizard's noon is the best time to develop, as they are now closest to the sun, and that is why, at this moment, bin magic is very strong. After the explanation, he ordered them to close their eyes. It was to feel his fire bin elements. They had to be absorbed carefully and make every effort to become a first-level apprentice, however, as he had approved. For JYO and SU, noon was not the best time to cultivate. Since JO was a Bindin wizard, he has two appropriate times of development: in the evening when the sun sets in the west, and in the morning at sunrise. And Dean's fire magic is at its best at night. From all of this, Jo realized that he could only concentrate magic in the morning and evening. But after some thought, he realized he had a better place to train than this. But he couldn't come to her empty-handed, so he had to go to a private bar and create a divine drink. This recipe was unusual, but even so, Jo thought she would really like it. He was encouraged by the fact that in that place, he could train at the same speed as the rest of the end result was milky white, a slight tinge of yellow, sweet with the presence of a sour aftertaste, and the degree was not too high. So this drink is ideal for girls. And only now he wasn't ashamed to go to her with such a drink in his hand. Jo started to do everything by strictly following the instructions, putting his hand to his heart and saying Li Yan's name. In a couple of moments, he found himself in this underworld, on a flower that was just above the lava. But even with the surroundings, he couldn't tell if he was there. But after a short time, Li Yan appeared nearby, delighted at Jo's arrival. She was sure she'd surprised him, and she wanted to see if he liked the surroundings. And he actually thought it was marvelous. Li explained that because the center of the earth is too monotonous, she decided to embellish it based on what the surface looks like. It wasn't the same as the world upstairs, but at least the magma wouldn't touch Jo anymore. After this dialogue, Li did notice the drink he was holding and decided to ask if it was for her. Jo explained that he hadn't poured it into a glass because he was afraid the drink would evaporate here. Li, like last time, took the bottle in her hands and thanked Jo for it. As she drank her drink so casually, Jo was looking at her thinking how beautiful it was. The girl noticed that this time, the flavor was completely different from the last time, so she wanted to know the name of the drink. As Jo said, this drink was called White Moon. It's sweet with a slight sourness like dew in the moonlight. Li liked that name, and she liked this cocktail this time, so she's not mad about it. And she asked that next time he bring it in a glass, because that way the drink could be tasted better. And she also said that there was no need to be afraid that it might evaporate. After she tasted the drink, she realized that it was okay to let Jo try to cultivate, and she was going to enjoy the white moon in the meantime. While trying to cultivate, Jo thought about the fact that in this underworld, there was no limit in the fire yin-yang element, and the absorption level was tens of times higher than on Earth. He was grateful to Li Yan for giving him the opportunity with such demands, so he decided he wouldn't let her down. A year later, as he once again sat in this world, Li turned to him and told him that it had been almost a year since Jo had been here, and every day for a year, he brought her a completely different drink, which never let Li Yan down, which she was very happy about. Though, in fact, as she claims, she has been able to watch him and his endeavors all this year because of the red lotus sign on his chest, and even in those hours, during sunset and sunrise, he didn't waste them. And in 1 year, he went from a level 1 fire Bindin apprentice to a level 4 apprentice. She wanted to know if he was really that hungry for power, to which he answered honestly that he was striving to become stronger, for without strength in this world, he was nothing. And since he had chosen this goal, he would do his best to become the best, and he did not want her to be disappointed in giving him this opportunity. When she heard that answer, she thought that because she'd been drinking his cocktails for a year, Li Yan can teach him a thing or two. Of course, if Jo doesn't care what his classmates think of him. The idea was that she would combine those two flames with the Bindin fire in Jo's body, and that would enhance his development in the future, and those two seeds he could consider as compensation for making cocktails for her. He should also feel that these two flames are from Fire Yang and Fire Yin, and they are much purer than the magical power he is developing. Li Yan uses these two flames, and the one in gold is the sacred fire of Bing Wu Yan, and the black one is the spiritual fire of Ding Shi Ming Yin. These two seeds will make his fire the same as hers. He couldn't fathom that he would have the same flame as her, but she decided to say right off the bat that all the magic he had collected over the year would be burned up, which would result in a severe reduction in his magical power. So he had to think hard about whether he wanted that or not. Plus, he's got an exam tomorrow, and he's been studying for this test the whole time, and his teacher's expectations would all be in vain. So she asked him to take his time and think carefully before he made a choice. Lastly, she said something about believing in Jo, and he said he wanted to. Jo felt that trading 1 year of hard work on quality improvement development was definitely worth it. He decided that if he could work hard for 1 year, he could do it again. But he couldn't change the quality just by working hard. And in his mind, he thought that having the same flame as Li Yan was a great happiness for him, and he decided that he would do it no matter what. By doing so, he was literally making her look at him in a new light, as someone who was worthy of having a body with yin-yang balance. So she asked to believe that he would be happy that he had chosen this decision, and she claimed that she needed him to sleep while she transferred those seeds into his body. Li Yan thought about the fact that he didn't disappoint her, and she's getting more and more infatuated with him. And in fact, she didn't want to see him because he made her have a daily routine, and it's limiting her, and she doesn't want that. And if he hesitated even for a second, she would harden her heart and kick him out. Stop drinking his cocktails. But it seems now her daily routine will continue, since they have already established a daily routine. She has to do something about it. She had mixed feelings. On the one hand, she wants him to let her down and kick him out, and on the other hand, she wants to enjoy his cocktails forever. She is experiencing this strange feeling for the first time in her long life. It was uplifting and frightening at the same time, but even so, Jo was undeterred. She realized that things were starting to get out of her control, and it was scary. But she decided to keep her head up and told him the information about the fires. Her fire, completed fire, and spiritual fire. Li explained that they are fire lords who can control all other fires, and they are capable of destroying even the heavens. These two fires will change him and do him a lot of good in the future. And then she said the phrase again, and some unusual process began, during which she asked me to learn how to hide power to make her life easier. When he opened his eyes and regained consciousness, Jo couldn't understand what was happening. Li Yan asked not to be surprised, explaining that Bing Wu Yuan Yan's holy fire and Ding Shi Ming Yin's spiritual fire were the kings of all fires, and Jo only merged with them so the flames around him obeyed. Now after it merged with the two seeds, it has resistance to fire, and no flames can harm it in the future. Jo was pleased that she had given him this gift, so he wanted to thank her too, but she replied that that was the reward for his drinks, and if he wanted to repay her, just making her more cocktails would suffice. Also, Li kept the abilities of developing these fires in his memory. This way is called Yin-Yang Divine Seal, through which he will be able to contain the completed fires, the purest power of yin and yang in his body. He will be able to use the power of the Bing Wu Yuan Yan holy fire and the Ding Si Ming Yin spiritual fire if necessary. But he must remember that he should only use this power when it is very necessary. and it was time for him to call it a day, which surprised Joe because he thought he'd stay longer. A year had already passed, and he wondered if Leon had begun to accept him, for he had already decided that he would never let her down and would work even harder. The next morning on the Linho Academy sports field, everyone was squared off again. Sia began to tell the students that the exams were about to begin, and he, as the head of the Firebin faculty, would explain the order of the exam to them. There are no specific rules for it. The students themselves have to go up to the podium, say their name and class. Those who have said their names go to the center of the podium and unleash their magic. The number of crown stars that appear will be used to assess their level. The Academy's grade is based on the number of stars that appear. The average grade for first-year apprentice is level 2. Outstanding grade is level 3. The Academy will reward and penalize students according to their achievements. So he asked everyone to try their best. And now they're starting. And the first one to take the podium is this freshman. She had the element of Firebin, named Jugui. Jugui, with the element of Firebin, was a level 7 apprentice, for which she was given a grade of excellent. And even the director thought it was a good result. Carl Firebean and SU Firedean. They were both level 4 apprentices, giving them a grade of excellent as well. Joe at this time was standing there afraid that he wouldn't be able to pass today, for which he was guilty in front of the principal. While he was pondering, different apprentices were taking the test, having level 2 and level 3 apprenticeships, but at one point it was his turn, causing SU and Carl to freeze in anticipation. He began to walk slowly to the podium, and the director pondered what kind of results Jo had achieved this year. Joe tried his best, but the result didn't change because of it, and in the end, he ended up with a level 1 journeyman showing. He had expected it, but when it happened, he felt incredibly sad. Carl, SU, and that freshman couldn't believe that he couldn't step up in a year. The director was surprised because he was expecting some result, and as sad as it was, Sia had to say about J-Lo not passing the exam. He was frustrated by this, but no one was going to wait. So the teacher started calling out to the second-year students, and the JOs called after them. Sia affirmed that according to the rules of the Linho Academy, the Academy trained him for the past year, but he could not. So according to the rules, those who did not pass the exam will be expelled. Joe understood, but asked for another chance anyway, claiming that he would take the exam next year. But Zia asserted that life doesn't give you many chances, and if he missed this chance, he didn't deserve another one. Besides, given his yin-yang balance, it would be difficult to become a yin-yang master, so he'd just be wasting his time if he kept going. And now he had to go pack. And tomorrow, Sia would send him away from the academy, and he thought it was even better that way. At this moment, the teacher next to him asked Sia why he was wasting his time on such garbage, and this teacher thought that Jo should just leave. After all, there were still 5 more courses to take the exam. Such words did not please Xia, so he asked teacher Liu Jun to watch his language, for he did not consider Jo as trash. Liu's response to that was that if Jo wasn't a lowlife, he would have been able to go from level 1 journeyman, and Liu still doesn't understand how he was accepted into the academy with full balance. Those words had already made Xia very angry, so he wasn't so in control anymore. But at that point, the principal was able to stop them and told Jo personally that it was academy rules. Jo apologized to him and told him that he had really disappointed him. However, suddenly, someone came into the room, and Liu was surprised that someone dared to do so. It was some man apologizing for barging in. He had heard from Xiao Gui that there was someone with balance among the freshmen, and he hoped the teachers would give Jo another chance. The guy told the teacher about how the rules are unchanging, but times change, and Jo is developing a double element that is very rare, so he is different from the majority. But Sia asked him to stop, because he thought that a student of Linho Academy should not interfere in the affairs of the academy. He tried to talk about how the development of JWO might accelerate next year, but the teacher stopped him and told him to leave, and for trespassing without permission, he would run one lap around the city. The guy apologized to his little sister, who was that gifted freshman, and asserted that he couldn't help in any way. Su, Carl, and Joe were very upset, and Sia prepared to announce his departure, but the principal stopped him, saying that the student Jutian is right, that the rules are unchanging, but times change. Joe failed the exam, but he has to make the choice himself. Joe and Liu were very surprised by that statement and began to realize what he was getting at. JWO had a choice to either leave the academy or stay on as auditor. He will not have to take exams until the 6th year, but he will not be considered a student. And if he changes his mind, he can leave the academy at any time, and he will only have to pass the final exam to be considered a graduate of the academy. And it didn't take long for Jo to decide to stay on as a student auditor. Carl and Su were happy that he could now stay with them, and they could finish the academy together. After that, the principal talked about how they shouldn't forget teacher Shia's punishment, and he also mentioned that they came here to help Jo, so he would also run a lap around the town. But even so, Jo was incredibly pleased and thanked the director for such leniency. He came out of school and thanked the guy who came and stood up for him. However, he said that there was no need to thank him, because if he wanted to, he could thank Xiao Gui, although he felt that she wouldn't care about it. He also remarked that he had never heard of a person with yin-yang balance who was able to become a yin-yang master before, and he asserted that if Jo wanted to succeed, he would have to put more effort into it. After saying that, he decided it was time to go and work out his punishment. Jo decided that he needed to thank the freshman for that. However, she felt that he didn't have to do it. After all, he was also from the Firebin faculty. Besides, she knows that he didn't slack off. When he asked how she knew, the girl only replied that a lazy person would not be able to train and run in spite of rain, hail, or scorching heat, and she also hoped they could compete during final exams. Siu thought about what this girl's purpose was, and noticed that she was nicer than usual today, but Carl tried to stop him, saying that Su was going to get back at her, but he claimed that he hadn't forgotten anything, but just realized that she wasn't that irritable, and Jo wondered why all the teachers listened to what that guy said. 3 years later, Jo sat and cultivated, his eyes already colored red and blue. It looked amazing, like he'd learned an incredible amount in that time. As he continued to sit, he thought about the yin-yang divine seal being the technique through which he could control the magical power of his element with a thought, and Leyan said he could start concentrating the yin-yang crown. But he felt he had to do something before he went to see her. Then Jo went to the principal's office with a drink in his hand that he had prepared for him. However, it was clear from the look on the director's face that he was in a bad mood, and Jo decided that if he was busy, he needed to leave. But he asked him to wait, and started talking about how Jo had been at his academy for 4 years, and he'd been making delicious cocktails for him for 4 years. And even so, he felt that he had failed to fulfill his promise to help him become a yin-yang master, and he felt that Jo couldn't waste any more of his time here. So he asked him to pack up, and decided that he would send him to the Bartenders Guild at the end of the semester. The director asked JWO not to deprive himself of a future because of his selfish desires. But Jo claims it was his personal decision to stay here because he likes being here. The director felt that he was here to stay because of his friends, but realized that Carl and Su would develop a lot and leave. So he wanted to understand why Jo would stay here if they left. He thanked him for it, but decided to discuss it after the end of semester exams. The principal tried to stop him, for he had not finished his speech. Jo asked him not to worry, and talked about pleasantly surprising him in the exams. He came to Young Ling again and wanted to start, but she asked if he was ready. It was the most important part of his training, and no matter how he felt, it would take effort. He had prepared himself a little mentally, and in a few moments he was ready for it. It was the most important part of his training, and he must not be distracted no matter what. Yang Ling once again ordered him to sit down cross-legged and get down to business. While Jao was trying to do that, Lin was telling him all sorts of information about crowns. Yin-Yang crown is concentrated magical power transformed into an unusual elemental form and concentrated on the chest, and in comparison to other people, it was harder for Jao to make the crown because you had to keep a balance, a balancing act, especially now that his lights are so strong and not like everyone else's. These lights repel each other, which makes this task many times more difficult. The lights are literally attacking each other. Joe felt like his chest was going to burst open often, and he hadn't felt hot in a long time. But now his body was on fire, and he couldn't delay any longer. For if they continued to fight, Jidong wouldn't be able to stop the destructive wave. After Lian's help, the place where the fires fought calmed down, and the chaos turned into complete balance. He continued to concentrate, and after a short time, an unpleasant scraping noise was heard that spoke of something. Lin, watching him feel bad, thought about how he'd never let her down once, and she wanted him to get over it. Everything seemed almost exactly the same to her as it had when they first met. Then she commanded the completed fires to obey her words and her will, and ordered the two flames to unite and create a golden and black spiral that appeared in Joe's chest. In just a few moments it worked, and the crown was formed right before his eyes. Henceforth, he was a yin-yang master, and this yin-yang spiral was the union of the two fires in his body. And Lin also remarked that human custom says he should call her his teacher. But in response, he firmly asserted that he wouldn't call her that, or rather, he just couldn't do it. She thought he was saying she wasn't good enough to be his teacher, but she wasn't. Joe just thought it would make Lin look older, and when she heard that, she let him not call her that, because in their world, it didn't matter anyway. But what he was really thinking about was that if he called her teacher, even when he became stronger, he wouldn't be able to tell her how he felt about it. At this moment, Lin noticed that he wasn't very excited, causing her to not understand his logic since he wanted to become a yin-yang master so badly. And he replied that it was because he was only a level 1 disciple and still had a long way to go, so he wasn't very happy about it. But Lin believed that always pushing himself was not good. However, if he overdid it, he would easily burn out, and having a body with an equilibrium, yin and yang dual element body, he should realize that he needed to make efforts carefully. And she also remembered that she had good news for him, whereupon she asserted that he would be glad to hear it. After concentrating the crown, the master will no longer need to feel this elemental force and collect as he did before he concentrated the crown. The spiral will not only help to absorb the fire element, but will also help to maintain the balance between yin and yang. His crown has a strong attraction force that will increase his development speed in the future, and the higher his level, the higher his elemental power requirements. Also, if he absorbs only one fire element, the spiral will help him to internalize it, so he will no longer have limitations in the human world. This was incredibly good news, for he would now be able to develop not only at sunrise and sunset, and even without coming to the lake of the center of the earth. He would be able to take good steps in development, but he will have to put more effort because of the spiral and the power of both elements. And now with the spiral, he can change the power of the fire elements. But all this can only be achieved with excellent control. And if his control is weak, it will only prevent him from unleashing his power. And afterward, she asked Joe to stretch out her arms forward, for she had 2 presents for him. But he felt she'd helped him too much already, so the gifts were just unnecessary. And even so, she wanted to give them away, because she didn't need those 2 things. And by giving it to him, she'll save herself a lot of worry, So there's a couple of upsides. Joe at this time was thinking about Leon being so close to him for the first time, and the smile of joy really didn't come off her face. He believed that if he held these hands all the time, he would have no regrets, even if he died. He was starting to get really hurt, but Lynn asked him not to let go of her hand until it was over, after which she reflected that not only did Jo not pull her hand away, but he was also trying his best to control her, and he was not clutching her hand for fear of accidentally hurting her. He had never doubted her, even when suffering, even in this painful moment of, he's not trying to suppress the pain, but he's trying to control the strength of his arm.